They wore the same shade of field gray, but they were fighting two different wars. To the regular German soldier, the men with the lightning bolts on their collars were unpredictable fanatics who burned villages and wasted ammunition. To the generals, they represented a dangerous political militia that threatened the traditional order of the Prussian officer corps. However, by 1945, the hatred had turned into a desperate reliance. The story of the Wehrmacht and the SS is a tale of rivalry, murder, and a betrayal that lasted long after the guns fell silent. If you want to uncover the dark history they tried to hide, hit that subscribe button right now, because it only takes a second and helps us bring these stories to light. Consider the perspective of a professional soldier trained in a tradition stretching back to Frederick the Great. You value discipline, tactics, and chain of command, until a new group arrives that doesn't salute the same way. Their loyalty belongs not to the state or the Constitution, but to a single man. This was the reality for the Wehrmacht in the late 1930s when they looked at the SS Verfügungstruppe and saw thugs in uniforms. The army called them asphalt soldiers, a nasty insult implying they were only good for marching on paved roads during parades. The generals feared these political upstarts would eventually replace the army entirely, and they were right. Heinrich Himmler wanted a fully militarized state within a state, rather than just a bodyguard unit. The tension was personal, as army officers looked down on SS commanders as uneducated brawlers, while the SS viewed the army as reactionary relics of a dead era. The invasion of Poland on September 1, 1939, was the first real test, and the verdict from the army was brutal. Wehrmacht General Johannes Blaskowitz reported that SS units were fighting with reckless abandon and taking completely unnecessary casualties because their officers didn't know how to lead. They charged blindly into machine gun fire and refused to retreat when tactically necessary. To the Wehrmacht professionals, this was stupidity rather than bravery. The criticism went deeper because the army operated under a strict military code while the SS operated on racial hatred. Army commanders watched in horror as SS units burned synagogues and executed civilians behind the lines. Blaskowitz wrote a memorandum detailing these crimes and warned that the SS was destroying the army's discipline. But Hitler dismissed the complaints because he wanted killers rather than professional soldiers in the East. You have to understand the class system to understand the hate, since the Wehrmacht officer corps was a closed club where many names started with von. They came from noble families, attended the same academies, and believed they were the rightful guardians of Germany. Then came the SS officers, who were often from the working class, including failed farmers, ex-policemen, or restless students. In the SS, fanaticism mattered more than pedigree. Sepp Dietrich was a former butcher's apprentice whom the aristocratic army generals mocked relentlessly behind his back because they couldn't stand that a man with no formal staff training was commanding divisions. This social friction created a wall of ice between the command staffs, where an army colonel would often refuse to dine with an SS counterpart. It was a snobbish rejection of everything the Nazi revolution represented socially. The invasion of France changed the conversation when the SS Totenkopf Division, formed from concentration camp guards, fought with a ferocity that stunned the British and French. But they also shocked their own allies, because the SS attacked during the Battle of Arras, when regular units might have paused. Then came the Le Paradis Massacre on May 27, 1940, where SS troops cornered a group of British soldiers from the Royal Norfolk Regiment. The British surrendered, and while a Wehrmacht unit would have taken them prisoner, the SS machine-gunned them in a barn. When news of this reached the regular army command, many officers were disgusted because it violated the unwritten rules of war they still pretended to follow in the West. Yet a grudging respect began to form as the SS took objective after objective, regardless of the body count, and the army realized these fanatics could be the blunt instrument used to smash the hardest defenses. The idea that the SS always had the best gear is not entirely true, especially during 1940 and 1941 when the Wehrmacht controlled the logistics. They were petty and deliberately starved SS divisions of new vehicles and weapons. While Army panzer divisions drove German tanks, SS units often rolled into battle in captured Czech trucks and used second-rate weapons. It was a bureaucratic stranglehold where army quartermasters argued that the political troops hadn't earned the good steel. This forced the SS to become scavengers who developed a reputation for stealing equipment from army depots or requisitioning gear from other units. It wasn't until later, when Himmler's influence grew and the war turned against Germany, that the supply lines flipped. By 1944, the SS received priority for the new Tiger and Panther tanks, which only reignited the army's jealousy. The invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 erased the moral line between the two armies. The Wehrmacht likes to claim they fought a clean war while the SS did the dirty work. But the records tell a different story. The army provided logistical support, trucks and ammunition to the SS Einsatzgruppen death squads, while regular soldiers guarded the perimeters as the SS executed thousands of Jewish civilians in ravines. The scale of the violence in the East was so vast that the Wehrmacht's disdain for unprofessional conduct evaporated. They were fighting for survival against the Red Army, and suddenly those fanatical SS divisions were the best friends a general could have. When a Soviet breakthrough threatened the line, army commanders stopped asking about the SS officers' table manners and just wanted to know how many tanks they had available. By 1943, the relationship had transformed as the Waffen-SS expanded from a few regiments into full panzer divisions like Leibstandarte, Das Reich, and Totenkopf. They became the Fire Brigades of the Eastern Front, so whenever the line collapsed, the call went out for the SS. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, a strategist who privately looked down on the Nazis, used these divisions as his iron fist, because he knew that unlike some exhausted army units, the SS would often fight to the last man. At the Battle of Kharkov, the SS retook the city in brutal house-to-house fighting that left the streets paved with bodies. The regular army soldiers watching this felt a mix of relief and horror, because the SS saved their skins, but displayed sheer ruthlessness. The asphalt soldiers had become the most feared mechanized force on Earth. This elite status came with a price tag that appalled traditional officers because the SS casualty rates were staggering. In the Army, a company commander's job was to achieve the objective while keeping his men alive, whereas in the SS, the objective was everything and death was just a statistic. Wehrmacht reports from 1943 often note the wasteful use of manpower by SS commanders who would launch frontal assaults against fortified Soviet positions that a regular army officer would have flanked or bombarded. One Wehrmacht officer wrote home that the SS fought like men who wanted to die. This suicidal bravery created a weird dynamic where regular soldiers admired the SS for their courage but thought they were insane. No one wanted to be transferred to an SS unit because you might get better camouflage and a cooler reputation, but your life expectancy dropped to weeks. Nothing horrified the regular army quite like the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, formed in 1943 and recruited almost entirely from teenage boys born in 1926. They were 17 years old and raised on a diet of pure Nazi propaganda, commanded by officers who were veterans from the Eastern Front. When they deployed to Normandy in 1944, veteran Wehrmacht troops stared at them in disbelief and called it the Baby Division. Some older soldiers even offered them candy as a joke. But the laughter stopped when the fighting started. These kids fought with a fanaticism that terrified the Allies because they didn't surrender and climbed onto enemy tanks with magnetic mines. The Wehrmacht watched these teenagers get slaughtered in the thousands and felt a deep sense of tragedy because it was the ultimate proof that the regime would sacrifice its own future to buy a few more days of power. As the war dragged on, the SS began recruiting non-Germans, including Frenchmen, Belgians, Norwegians, and even Ukrainians and Latvians who wore the SS runes. To the average German Wehrmacht soldier, this was baffling because the Nazi ideology was built on racial purity. Yet here were divisions of foreigners fighting under the SS banner. The Wehrmacht generally viewed these foreign SS units with extreme suspicion and contempt, considering them unreliable, poorly trained, and prone to desertion. While some foreign units, like the Nordic Viking Division, fought well, others were undisciplined mobs that army generals hated having on their flanks. They felt that the SS had diluted the honor of the German uniform by handing it out to anyone willing to pull a trigger, which was another sign that the SS cared more about expanding its empire than maintaining military standards. In December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, the friction flared up again as the Wehrmacht tried to conduct a professional offensive in hopes of forcing a negotiation with the Allies. Then Kampfgruppe Piper, an SS unit, murdered 84 American prisoners of war at Malmedy, and news of the massacres spread quickly. American resistance stiffened instantly, as soldiers who might have surrendered now fought to the death because they believed the Germans took no prisoners. Wehrmacht generals were furious and blamed the SS for ruining any chance of a diplomatic end to the war in the West. They saw the SS not just as criminals, but as liabilities who were actively helping the enemy by stiffening their resolve. To the army, the SS were arsonists, setting fire to the house while the family was still inside. By late 1944 and 1945, the distinction between the two organizations began to blur in a chaotic mess of retreat as the SS ran out of volunteers. They started drafting men who would normally have gone to the Wehrmacht, or even took men directly from the Navy and Air Force, leaving regular sailors wearing SS uniforms against their will. The Wehrmacht resented this poaching of manpower and watched as the SS press-ganged their personnel, while claiming priority over every able-bodied man left in the Reich. It wasn't about being elite anymore, but about filling gaps in the line. The army saw the SS devolve from a political elite into a desperate collection of stragglers who forced terrified civilians to hang white flags from their windows or be shot. The rivalry continued until the very last days in the ruins of Berlin. The war ended, but the rivalry didn't, as the Wehrmacht generals executed their final maneuver against the SS at the Nuremberg Trials. Led by men like Franz Halder and Erich von Manstein, the army leadership presented a unified front to the Allies with a simple narrative. They claimed the Wehrmacht was a professional, apolitical organization that just followed orders, while the SS were the monsters who committed all the crimes. They betrayed the SS to save their own necks, and the Allies accepted it because they needed to rebuild the German army for the Cold War. This was the birth of the Clean Wehrmacht myth, where the generals successfully convinced the world that the army despised the SS and had nothing to do with the Holocaust. It was a lie that worked for decades. In the 1950s, this bitterness spilled into the streets of West Germany when former SS men formed a lobby group called HIAG to claim they were soldiers like any other. They wanted pensions and respect, but the new West German army, the Bundeswehr, wanted nothing to do with them. Wehrmacht veterans who were now commanding the new army blocked SS men from joining and refused to attend reunions if SS units were invited. The message was that the SS were separate and distinct. Even though they had fought in the same trenches and committed many of the same crimes, the army veterans maintained this social and moral barrier to protect their own rehabilitation. The SS remained the outcasts and the convenient villains that allowed the Wehrmacht to reintegrate into society. The German army generally thought the SS were amateurs. Then they thought they were useful, and finally, they considered them a liability. But beneath the insults and the snobbery lies a darker truth. The Wehrmacht may have hated the SS for their lack of style or their bad tactics, but they rarely stopped them and even facilitated the SS's crimes by relying on their terror. The rivalry was real, but it was a sibling rivalry within a criminal family. Today, we know that the Clean Wehrmacht never existed. The army and the SS were two hands strangling the same throat. They hated each other, but they marched together until the world burned around them. The relationship between the Wehrmacht and the SS proves that military professionalism is no shield against moral corruption. They squabbled over tanks and medals, while millions died at the hands of both. It is a reminder that in a regime built on hate, there are no clean hands, only different uniforms. If you found this analysis fascinating, make sure to like and subscribe for more deep looks into history's darkest chapters.